Hello, human peoples. You're listening to the podcast network of Gamefully Unemployed. Support us and gain access to great exclusive podcasts like Fox Mulder is a Maniac, Tom and Jeff Watch Batman, Star Trek The Next Futurama, and our latest show, Spiel Boys. Head over to patreon.com/gamefullyunemployed. We do game streaming, movie nights with our patrons every Friday night, and you can even commission your own podcast about anything you want. Literally anything, within reason, and we have to do it. You are quite frankly out of excuses not to go visit patreon.com/gamefullyunemployed. That's patreon.com/GAMEFULLY unemployed, which is spelled like it sounds.
That's bad. 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 That's bad. 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 Bad.
Welcome, folks, to a brand new episode of BADAPTATIONS.
BADAPTATIONS!
Yeah, I'm one of your sneezy hosts. I'm David Bell.
I'm less sneezy right now. I was sneezy earlier, but I'm your other occasionally sneezy host, Tom Ryman.
Good.
Yeah,
That's good.
I was moving a lot of
This
boxes,
is all good.
Dave. So, you know.
Oh, that'll make you sneezy.
That'll make you real sneezy. Yeah, it'll turn you into a sneezer.
Yeah, I just have allergies, folks. So don't worry. Nobody worry, about me.
In case you were worried, don't.
Yep. And a big shout out to our producer, Grumblebee. Grumblebee is the one who made this podcast happen. And if you don't know, it's been a minute. BADAPTATIONS has been a podcast series where we look at movies that are adaptations of other things. Movies that are seen, at least, as bad adaptations.
Yes.
We don't always agree with that.
No.
But that is the starting point. Movies that are traditionally seen as adaptations that are bad or badaptations.
Yeah. See, we mash the words together and cut out like a letter or two just to save you time, just to save everyone time.
It's wordplay.
It is. It's also efficiency, Dave.
We say
that so it saves us time, so we have more time to be cool.
Right, but it only saves us time if we don't explain it like we just did.
What are you talking about? Well, now they understand. Now they understand, Dave.
That's true. They wouldn't understand otherwise.
No,
You're right.
They needed to know how much time we're saving them.
That's a good point.
Yeah.
That's a good point. And oh my goodness, you probably saw from the title of this episode that we are covering 2005's Aeon Flux.
Woo!
An adaptation of a cartoon series that was on MTV. This is starring Charlize Theron and others.
Yeah,
and,
Johnny Lee Miller.
Yes.
Martin Sokus, I think is his name.
Yes.
Pete
It's
Postlethwaite.
Yep, Frances McDormand.
Frances McDormand is in there. Frances McDormand did not leave a room. She stayed in, it was a real Ben Kingsley in Blood Rain.
Right.
Cameo.
She didn't leave the room, nor should she have.
No.
Yeah. Neither did Petey there, but they put a bunch of shit on him.
Yeah. They put this movie is trying to be The Matrix and Dune simultaneously.
Yes. And we have sections, and I'm just going to call these sections out before we get started.
Do it.
We're going to talk about what would make a good adaptation of Aeon Flux. We're going to start from the basics. And then we're going to talk about what this movie got wrong.
Yes.
And then we're going to talk about does the movie just hold up? Mm-hmm. What does it get right? And Tom.
Yeah.
What is your history with the source material, Aeon Flux?
Very, very little. The only thing I know, I caught a couple of the shorts when it used to play on this show called Liquid Television in the early 90s. For you youngsters who don't know, MTV had this late night animation program. I think it was a half hour where they would just play 2 or 3 shorts that were really experimental. It's also how Beavis and Butthead got started. They were a Liquid Television short. And there's been a few other notable ones that I can't think of at the moment, but like the biggest ones in my memory were Beavis and Butthead and Aeon Flux. But Aeon Flux was so weird and felt so adult in its content and animation style. It's just like it was a big turnoff for like 9-year-old me. I never got into it, and I didn't appreciate how kind of weird it was like if I had found it as a teenager, I probably would have been more into it. But as a little kid, I just wanted to see like Beavis and Butthead.
Right. It just so happens, Tom, that I found this as a teenager.
Okay.
I have watched all of Aeon Flux at least probably in the double digits at this point.
Okay.
Over 10 times. I have watched this series. It really is only one season. There are technically 3 seasons. Season 1 consists of a pilot, and Season 2 are the 5-minute liquid television segments. And then Season 3 is when it actually became like a TV show.
Yeah.
With like 22-minute episodes or such. I first saw this on a liquid television VHS tape that I got I rented as a teen and got, high and watched.
Yeah, that's what you're supposed
and
to
I
do.
and I glommed onto the Aeon Flux shorts for people who are curious, who haven't seen it. The Aeon Flux shorts, the liquid television shorts, are a series of very bizarre, often surreal plots that always end. Every single episode ends with Aeon dying. I believe. Maybe not every episode.
I think there's a few exceptions, but yeah.
Yeah. And they're all very surreal. They're a little Lynchian, I would say. They have
Very much so.
Yeah, it was created by Peter Chung, who you might know as the person who also created Rugrats. So when you watch Rugrats, you'll notice the animation style is actually oddly similar to Aeon Flux. It is a very weird show. And then once they got into the actual 22-minute episodes, things got even weirder. And Tom, I guess I'll explain some of this to you because the roles are reversed this time. Usually you know the source material more than me. Mm-hmm. And this time I know it. I know
you've got it
well.
cold, man. I don't know shit about this universe.
Yeah. It is. So I think we're in the what makes a good adaptation of this, for starters. Because part of knowing that is explaining it.
I'll have some input on that just from what I remember of the show and its general vibe and style and feel. But you're going to have the meat of this section.
Right. I'm not gonna. So I'm gonna just say the kind of premises they have, and then you can probably guess what makes a good adaptation.
We should explain what it is, right?
Aeon Flux?
Yeah, I think you're about to, right?
Yeah, I mean, so the animated series again. So the first couple seasons are a series of shorts, and they're not very coherent, but you can tell that there's 2 warring factions.
And it's
Aeon
like
Flux belongs to the Monarchins,
and it's like in a post-apocalyptic wasteland sort of thing.
Yeah, it's I think it's described as a German expressionist vibe.
That's not at all what I
to
got
the
from it.
style. That's the Wikipedia explanation. It's a surreal German expressionist style, futuristic universe. What that basically means is it was a lot of brutalist architecture, a lot of very spindly spider-like technology, kind of anime-ish.
I got way more of an anime vibe off of it. Like it reminded me of stuff like oh dang! Now I can't think of what I was thinking of. But yeah, it reminded me at the time of things of like Trigun or like Patlabor. More Trigun,
Right.
In the look, to be clear, not in the content.
Right. So in the show, as we get into the actual episodes, basically 2 cities separated by a wall, and they're fighting each other. And the Monarchins, which is Aeon Flux's group, they're more of anarchists. It's right there in the name, Flux. It's nothing is set.
Capacitor.
Then we have Trevor. What's that?
Capacitor.
Exactly.
Time travel.
Exactly.
She is a time machine. No.
I mean, there is time travel on the show. Trevor Goodchild is a dictator of his city. I actually forget what the city is called. And he's very fashy, very Orwellian. It's a police state. And so we have these 2 warring factions that cross each other's borders and are often trying to sabotage each other on the show. On top of that, Aeon Flux and Trevor are extremely attracted to each other, despite being enemies. And they have I would say an emotional attraction as well, but it sort of comes and goes. It's like a fleeting fascination that fluctuates
You
throughout.
might say.
Yes. And so they often kind of betray their own causes for each other and then betray each other, and it goes back and forth. That said, those are the main threads. Most of the episodes almost are standalone, like Twilight Zone episodes in a way. They deal with some like really weird sci-fi shit. For example, there is an episode where Aeon Flux learns that Trevor Goodchild is cloning her. And he's making like creepy sex slaves of her clones. And so she infiltrates him. And she learns he's cloning people, and she purposefully lets him clone her, basically. And then she swaps with one of her clones in order to destroy Trevor Goodchild, and then just ends up in like a relationship with him. And then her clone, which is on the outside, realizes that the real Aeon Flux has changed and ends up murdering her. And this is like episode 3. So for the rest of the show, Aeon isn't even herself. She's a clone of herself. It's shit like that. There's a episode where there are these robots called the Custodians that dig into your belly button that Trevor has created that makes you morally good. There's an episode that takes place in almost like a Borg cube in this liquid that if you go into the liquid, it paralyzes you. But while you're paralyzed, you can experience everything as you're paralyzed, like you're awake. And that episode ends with basically this cube being destroyed and everybody, including Aeon Flux, getting paralyzed. And there's this weird key that if you turn it, it'll turn the liquid like back into regular water. And the last thing she sees is the key drifting by and almost hitting the device that would do that, and then not, and then drifting away. And so she's just paralyzed for eternity. And then the next episode, she's not. And so that's what I mean is like narratively, it's very surreal, and the episodes don't necessarily run into each other. The spoilers, the final episode, which again, it's not a running plot, so it's nothing is nothing is a set narrative.
It's not serialized.
In the ending episode, they deal with aliens that they learn are just us from like thousands of years in the future, and it ends with Aeon and Trevor both blasting into the future and living in this weird alien civilization. Like, it's very surreal, very weird, and again, very Twilight Zone-y. There's a time loop episode. There's godlike creatures. There's an episode where Trevor gets obsessed with like a winged creature that he's kidnapped and kept away from its mate. It's really fucking weird shit.
Gotcha.
Yes. And so that is all to say to what makes a good adaptation of this is honestly you hand it to someone like David Cronenberg because it deals with some body horror tech. It's very surreal. You would do, if this is 2005, you'd maybe do like a Sin City type thing, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know if that's the best idea, but we're dealing with 2005 here.
I think this movie, okay, so my contribution to what would make a good adaptation of Aeon Flux is it needs to be, like you said, directed by like a Cronenberg or a Lynch. It needs to be really weird, and it needs to be really bold in how weird it is and how like
it really does,
because that's what sticks in your mind about Aeon Flux is how striking and kind of grotesque really the art style is, and not just like the body horror stuff, just the standard like character models for Aeon and Trevor are like they're like disproportionate, like they don't really,
they're all kind of spider-like.
Yeah, they don't really look quite human, and like from what I remembered of my memories of the episodes pretty much squares with how you described them, and they felt disconnected and just weird and sort of like all kind of like short stories or like Elseworld tales of the same universe. So
right,
so I feel like just an Aeon Flux movie needs to be really, really boldly weird and unlike anything that's like current sci-fi. It's kind of like a little old school sci-fi in a way.
Yes, it is. It kind of is. It's like a little retrofuturism, but like it is definitely like bolder, like again, this movie came out in 2005, which is not
2006.
2006,
which which I would argue is worse year for film.
Right. Yeah. And that's the problem is like for sci-fi especially, this is a safe, very sanitary time where it's like the worst time to adapt something like this. But just speak on the non sequitur of it all. For example, like in one of the first shorts, there's a part where like she's killing all these people who are infected with a weird virus. So like she kills a man and then he's lying there in like a pool of blood and he's staring and she throws a grenade. There's like, she's not even paying attention to him. He's just dying. And you see his perspective and he's imagining it all like an old timey cartoon. And the last thing he sees is this fish and the fish is clearly the grenade and it starts inflating and lighting up. And it's shit like that where it's like, there's no need to do that. That doesn't help with the plot. Or like in the Custodian episode, it starts on a train and the train cars are like weird art pieces. Like she gets into one where there's just no floor and it's just someone on a swing in the train car and that's the car. Like it's shit like that and they don't really explain it. And so there's just a lot of like they'll do stuff where she's walking and she'll go by a window and something in that window that's happening is really fucking weird. And so the world itself just feels off constantly. It's a hell of a thing to try to adapt.
Yeah.
And like you said, you have to be bold. You have to be really, really bold to correctly adapt Aeon Flux.
And I might almost say the better bet at making an adaptation of Aeon Flux would be to make a movie that is sort of kind of Pulp Fiction-y in that it has clearly demarcated vignettes and that they're not necessarily told in order. And even like you could have Aeon Flux die 3 different times and they come up with a way to explain it. Or, I mean, and it sounds like they did in the show as well, where you just need to say, oh, well, they're cloning Aeons. That's why this keeps happening.
Interestingly enough, they never really talk about that. There's a cloning episode, but it's not why she's resurrecting. For the record, they don't actually explain that. One of the closest they get is one of the episodes ends with her dying, and then all right. So let's see if I can remember this. It ends with her dying. Trevor continuing to rule, and in the final part, it shows a boy at a general store, and he's buying a porn magazine,
Hell yeah.
Foot fetish magazine.
Hell yeah,
and it has Aeon Flux on the cover, and then we see a weird afterlife where a spirit emerges from the water and starts licking her toes, and it seems to show some sort of renewal, but that's it, and that's as far as they explain her resurrections. I do think for a movie version, they could have said she's a clone. The Monachins just keep cloning her. And then I think it would be really cool if throughout the movie she just kept dying. Like by the end of the movie, we're on our like 16th Aeon Flux. That would have been cool.
That's what I was expecting sitting down to watch this movie because that's the only thing I remember really about the content or like the storylines of the episodes that I saw is that she always died.
Right. And that's what's interesting is in the later seasons, that isn't the case. She doesn't always die, but in the shorts she did. And I think you're joined by a lot of people who are probably like, all I remember is that she keeps dying. And you'd think that would be then the main thing they put in this. They do put a version in, but they do. It would have been so cool if she just kept dying. She also dies in really inconsequential or anticlimactic ways, if you remember. Like she'd trip or she'd step on a tack and fall off a building.
Yeah.
Like it was always like really dumb things.
Yeah, I remember it being stupid, which really, now that it's coming back to me now that you're mentioning it. And I guess I didn't quite appreciate, like I thought it was interesting as a kid, but I didn't quite appreciate the show for how weird it was and like what it was, the sort of statement it's making by throwing Aeon its hero away like that, at the end of this.
There's one of the shorts is her just falling because she falls out of an airplane.
I remember
and the
that
entire
one.
short is her falling.
I remember that one,
and it ends with her just dying.
Yeah,
because there's nothing she can do.
And there's it's not necessarily funny, but there's something. I don't know. It is kind of funny.
It's kind of funny.
It's like the Bullet Tooth Tony thing, or like.
I I do want to note that Aeon Flux the show, you might not remember this, but having watched it a bunch of times, it's actually funny. It's a funny show. It's also tremendously horny. Those are the two things about it.
I remember it being like staggeringly, suffocatingly horny, which is part of what kind of turned. I was too young for it, so it just kind of made me uncomfortable to watch.
Yes. Oh, it's uncomfortable even as an adult because it's weird, disgustingly horny.
Imagine being 8 or 9 and watching it.
And specifically, Aeon Flux is horny, and so is Trevor. And that's why I was saying, like, it's not quite romantic what they have. Like, they're kind of just horny, and they don't, like, I think in one of the first shorts, she's, like, watching Trevor make out with a woman while, like, in her, like, holding her gun and hiding, and she just, like, casually licks her gun. It's weird shit.
Yeah, I remember them being, like, lizards.
Yeah, they're horny lizards. And then Aeon is she's pretty sarcastic. There's also parts where it's just silly. Like the one I was talking about where Trevor's courting the winged creature. He like wears little wings to try to impress him and is like prancing in front of the mirror and stuff.
Hell yeah, he is.
Yeah, there are parts where they're just doing comedy. And then there's times where they're doing like really weird, dramatic shit. There's a memory erase one that's really fucked up. There's a lot. And again, it's all kind of every single episode is weirdly different. And so I think this is enough to set up the question of what did this movie get wrong?
Or right, as it were.
Yeah, I was going to say that.
But mostly wrong.
Yeah, I'm going to start with what it got wrong. One, the music, it just got wrong. It sounds like a mid 2000s movie, sci-fi movie.
Yeah, it's doing everything. It's that house music phase. This movie felt dated in 2006 because this is a movie that is clearly riding the Matrix wave. It's just a Matrix knockoff. But it is almost a decade too late to be a Matrix knockoff, right? Because the Matrix came out in '99, and the trilogy had wrapped up in 2003. So 3 years already removed from that when that style was like the biggest thing in the world.
Yeah, what it really comes down to, the broadest problem, is that they wanted to be the next Matrix.
Yeah.
So they thought, let's take this property that's really unique. But then they just tried to make it Matrix-like. Mm-hmm. And so, like, that's the biggest problem, is that it didn't... So this is interesting, because there are things it does right. But the general problem is it doesn't embrace the tone of the show.
No, it doesn't. It doesn't embrace any of the things, really, that made Aeon Flux stand out. There's some stuff, like they do... some of the creepy like biophage stuff where like the plants are weird and hostile and carnivorous and spiky. They do some of it, but like not nearly enough. Like they don't do the brutalist architecture. They do like Star Trek TNG architecture.
Yeah. I would say the architecture is...
They do a version of... in the little Pete Postlethwaite's ship, like... I said earlier, it was sort of like a collision between Matrix and Dune, and honestly, that is not a inappropriate description of what Aeon Flux, the cartoon series, was. So if they would have embraced more of the Dune-ness of it, and instead of like going in like a Matrix direction, going more of like an H.R. Giger direction. Yeah.
Generally speaking, they basically nerfed the weirdness.
Yeah.
And a good example of that is a very good one-to-one is there's a device in the movie that is also in the show. And that device is the weird squid that wraps around her body. So later, I don't know if we needed to explain the plot of this movie, by the way.
We could. I mean,
it's... You've either seen it or you didn't. It's about... So that's actually the big thing. There's not... So unlike the show, it's not two warring cities. It's one city in like an apocalypse where it's surrounded... The whole world is forest. And there's some virus. And so the Monarchans are now a terrorist faction within the city. And so that, honestly, I felt like kind of messed it up. But
and like
not a huge difference.
The Good Childs are like a dynasty that cured the plague that brought the world to an end, and they're keeping everybody in this city.
and it's a police state. And what we learn, the twist is, so I'll get into this. They fucked up both Trevor Goodchild and Aeon Flux. Basically, we learn that they're all copies of copies of copies. They're all clones because they don't. It's a fucking children of men situation. No one can have kids, so they just keep cloning everyone. But everybody is getting weirder and like more fucked up in the head.
I wanted to put a stop to unpack that a little bit because I do think that's an interesting idea and could have been the storyline to an Aeon Flux movie, where it's that there was a plague that ended life on Earth. The Goodchild's, Trevor specifically, came up with a cure, but the side effect of the cure is that it sterilizes everyone. So he's been cloning everybody until he can find a cure to the infertility that will also cure the plague. So that's like an interesting, I don't want to say framing device, but that's like, you could have taken that narrative, because that's kind of an interesting idea. And it also provides a way for you to have the version of this film where Aeon and Trevor, like, or not even Trevor, because he doesn't really die, I don't think, in the show. It's more Aeon dies over and over and over again. Right,
that's the thing, is the whole, like, it's a good idea because technically Aeon is dying over and over again, but so is everybody. But it is, I don't think this is a bad instinct. I really don't. I agree.
That they could have kept it as the two different cities, and that could have just been what we find out about Trevor's city, is that, oh, this is what he's been doing here. Yeah, he's a fascist, but he's like doing the wrong thing for the right reason, which is an interesting idea. And it sort of sets up that it allows you a space where the audience will be more forgiving of having like Trevor and Aeon, the hero, sort of have this attraction for each other if he's not like totally bad.
Well, I want to talk about that actually. Okay. Because that's kind of the problem. Is so what they do in this movie is they have Trevor have a brother who gets to be bad.
They put all of Trevor's bad qualities into Johnny Lee Miller, his brother.
Yeah. And that's not how
probably
the show
not the best
out.
Instinct. No, they should have kept all of that in the same character so that it's more complicated.
Yes, and the show is very morally complicated, and not just Trevor, but Aeon. Aeon is kind of a sociopath in the show. She is in a morally gray area in the show. Like I said, they will often betray their own causes because they're too horny. Mm-hmm. Like in the show, she's let people die because she's busy like making out with Trevor. And so it's hard to do, but like they wanted to kind of have their cake and eat it too here. And so they're like, it's okay. He's actually good. And it's like, no, he's bad. Trevor Goodchild should be a fascist dictator through and through. And Aeon should be a fucking terrorist, but they just can't quit each other. Is kind of the idea. And so like they have to make it like okay for them. And so he has to be like kind of good. Like her sister Una dies in this. They should have made it so that Trevor absolutely killed her sister. Like that's the sort of weird moral gray area they should do.
Right. Well, like he kills her and wait,
and we learn it's his brother.
Right.
It's like, oh no, my brother actually killed her.
Yeah,
it's
and
stuff like that.
He erased Aeon's DNA. Like that's what his brother did.
Right. And Trevor should have done that because he should have been like, I can't stand to see her again in this city.
Yeah.
So I'm erasing her DNA. Trevor should be bad, and that's part of the issue for the whole thing is that both of them should be one, a lot hornier. Both of them should be a lot more naked. Both of their hair is wrong. Those are all superficial things. But mainly
Aeon's is at least the right color.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. But they should both be kind of morally like not like in the gray, basically. It shouldn't be one or the other. We shouldn't really like either of them. Aeon should be more fun. She's very serious in this. She should be more sarcastic.
They really beat her with the blockbuster action hero stick, where it's basically you remove all nuance of a character so that they just react to things, and they always react in the most morally indignant, self-righteous way possible.
Yes. She's boring in this.
Yeah, which makes them boring.
Yeah. And it would have been to make it more complex morally would have made them more interesting.
Yeah.
Also, she has a fucking signature gun. I don't know why they didn't make the guns cool. And that was what I was going back to that.
In this movie, they look like water pistols. They look like super soakers.
They do. And going back to what I was saying about that weird squid tech. So there's a scene in this where she has this, like, it looks like a weird fucking face hugger squid. It's like a leather squid that she puts on her chest and it wraps around her. And what it does in this movie is it, like, portals her to another dimension, right?
Yeah, they have, like, a sub-dimension where they can speak to each other.
Right, and it's just like this white room. Yeah. It's the library scene. Now, I want to compare that to what they do in the show. In the show, they have a similar device. It straps to your chest. It wraps around. But what it does in the show is it vibrates your body so fast that only other people vibrating on that frequency can see each other. And everything else is a blur. I shouldn't say can see. You can basically, like, you can see things, but they're just these weird blurry shapes. But then when you put it on, you vibrate to their frequency, and it creates a second kind of group of things that you can interact with. But it's not a different dimension, and it's a lot more visually interesting. Like, you see what I mean? Where it's like, in the movie, they just go poop and, like, have her go to this fucking white world.
The watered down kids glove version of every aspect of Aeon Flux in this movie.
Or like the guns, for example, in the show, she has this really cool, weird looking gun that doesn't make that much sense. In this, they just give her a gun. Or like little things like the bad guys, if you look at what the henchmen look like in either, they look wildly different. And in the cartoon, they got like these weird ass helmets that don't quite make any sense. And so it's all these little things that add up. One of the good things they did is, like, at the beginning when the guy is like, have you seen my kid? And he's holding this weird amber cube with a face in it. That's the kind of thing they would do in the show. But since they're not doing it that much, that just looks dumb in this movie. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
They have the right instinct every now and then when she has, like, the map on her skin bulging out. When her eye changes.
She tears the little adhesive healing patches off her own skin to put on Trevor's bullet hole. Like, there's a couple of, and I wanted to talk about that real quick. The director of this movie is Karen Kusama, who I think is good. I like her. She made The Invitation. She's directed a lot of TV.
She is very good.
She made Jennifer's Body. She did a couple episodes, I think, of Yellow Jackets and some other stuff. Anyway, she's a really good director. She's a pretty good horror director, specifically horror suspense. So there's a couple of moments in this movie where I can see things where, like, shit, yeah, that's like, there's like one shot where Aeon, it's towards the end of the movie where Aeon's in the courtyard. She shoots a guard right through his visor and his eye, and he sort of, like, you know, snaps backwards as he's falling over, and his gun continues shooting, and he just sweeps his gun up behind him over his head, and he's just firing into the air as he's dying. That was a cool ass shot.
Right.
And so there's like, there's things like that, and, like, you know, the little instincts of what they did keep in there, which makes me wonder if there was like a more edgy version of this movie. Like this feels sanitized on the page, but it also feels like there was a further step of sanitizing. Did it feel that way to you? Yes.
There are definitely.
And another thing, where the fight scene between Aeon and Freya, and they're locked up, and Aeon, there's this, like, they draw it out where Aeon, like, very, you know, gets her tongue out of her mouth, wraps it around Freya's earring, locks her teeth on it, and rips her earring out of her ear. Like, it's like, it's like suspensefully staged, and then it's like this grotesque motion, like really brutal motion. I'm like, that's a cool ass idea, and that kind of feels like Aeon Flux to me.
Right. This feels like it was adapted to death in a way that whoever made it didn't make it passionately by the end. But, like, it does, and I wanted to talk about this in the next section, there are things where it's like, I think it started from a place of love and a place of wanting to adapt this correctly. Because there are certain shots, too, that just feel like they would belong in Aeon Flux. The entire intro sequence actually feels like an Aeon Flux intro with the narration. There are good instincts in here. But that's, again, going back to when it was made, one of the biggest problems of what did this movie get wrong is simply that it was made when it was made.
Yeah.
When studios were like, we're going to do it this way.
We're gonna make the
we're gonna-
Matrix.
Yeah. Where this stuff from the game or from the show, too weird. It's too weird. We need to nerf it. Like, that's the feeling, is like they're trying to work it in a little bit, but it's just not enough. Little things like her pulling a device out of her boot, that's very Aeon Flux. The character with hands on her feet, that's directly from the cartoon. There are parts in this that are directly from the cartoon.
Yeah.
But there's just something holding it back. And like, for example, mentioned in the cartoon, there's a border to be crossed. They do a version of this, which is, of course, the courtyard when they cross. And there's all the plants shooting at them and stuff.
Yeah.
That looks nothing like it does in the cartoon, that scene.
And
But it is technically that scene.
that scene is conceptually cool too. It's like the plants come alive, like
Right,
buds
which
in the-
isn't in the show. That's not in the show, but it's a cool idea.
It's a cool idea, and it has that right like vibe of being weird and grotesque. Like the trees have these little fruits that shoot needles like machine guns. The grass becomes thousands of little razor
Sharp.
blades. Yeah, it's a cool idea, and it looks so dumb the way that it's executed.
Yes. And that's part of it, is like, you're right about this director, but some of it, like that scene, I'm just like, it's just not
It's
well
just not.
done.
It's just not well done, and a lot of it's part of it. And I'm not going to say a lot of it. Part of it is the effects. Part of it is the design. Like the fruit pods that shoot the needles never look anything other than rubber fruit pods created by a special effects team. Like they just look. It looks bad.
And a lot of that might be how you shoot it. And
That's
then it's
true,
also like really bright, and it's not shot in a very interesting way. And that's why I was curious, because there's other shots where, like, when she's jumping over those like there's like gaps in the concrete, and it's these series of holes that were panning past, and you can just see her jumping through the holes, stuff like that, where I'm like, well, that feels like an Aeon Flux shot. And so it to me, it feels like because the director is good, it feels like a situation where they like didn't get to really direct, or they got beaten down by the process. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And so, like, it just ends up being like this very generic film that has these ideas that are almost good. Like, if you watched this without knowing the show, you'd be like, why do they keep doing these like almost interesting things and then kind of not?
That's what I was saying. It feels sanitized on the page, but it also feels like what we're seeing was further sanitized.
Yes. Yeah. And speaking of sanitized on the page, another big thing is that, weirdly enough, the climax of this movie is not like an Aeon Flux climax. Aeon Flux had action in it, but weirdly enough, it doesn't have that much action. It's actually more dramatic. And so, for example, that scene where they're crossing the border that we see in this courtyard, that's in the cartoon, but it's not really, it's an emotional scene. It's in the scene where she clones herself, and her clone, or her, I forget which one, the one that dies, so I guess the original Aeon, I believe uses that to kill herself, or like it becomes a dramatic beat where it's like, if you cross this area, or she also uses it to betray people. Like when they cross together, she does a thing like she leaves the other one hanging. And so like most of the action in Aeon Flux is generally dramatic. And in fact, a lot of the episodes just end in really weird, surreal ways, or like with like monologues or conversations. And so that's the other instinct in this that's really wrong, is just like the Matrix, they're like, it has to end in a big action sequence. And it's like, no, this needs to get progressively weirder. It needs to be more like the ending of like Doctor Strange, where he's just getting killed over and over again.
Yes.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
It has to be like not a big pew 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 action. It's got to be like everything everywhere all at once shit. Just like completely like just goes off the rails, dimensions, different eons, and like not like just a big explosion and something fucking crashes, you know? And so there's a big element missing where just the plot itself, like you said, the beginning premise, very good. But then where the plot heads, it can't just be like pew 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 and then we win.
There was potential too for the ending. Do we have a section where we talk about what the movie did right?
Yeah, let's get to it.
Okay.
Let's get to how does this film hold up,
Okay.
which I would say is how we could just say, what does it get right in this section?
Okay, so here's something I want to point out that it gets like 65% right.
Yeah.
So I think the ending of the climax of the film is almost there, because what happens is Aeon destroys the cloning facility so that they can't clone people anymore.
Right.
But Trevor's notes where he had found the cure to infertility, but his brother Johnny Lee Miller destroyed them. So Aeon, because she's who she is, she's this anarchist, terrorist, basically, is like, no, we have to destroy the clones because we need to be free. We need to be out of these walls. But there's also there's the conflicting viewpoint of Trevor where he's like, well, I need time to figure out the cure again. And if we can't clone people, we might go extinct before I'm able to figure it out again. But they add this, which would have been a good way to end the movie, I think, if they had just had that be the conflict and then Aeon crashes the ship. It's sort of like, well, you've kind of sort of fucked us all with your anarchist viewpoint. Possibly,
Right.
Potentially. You've liberated us in some sense because, as we pointed out, every time the people get cloned, they degrade a little mentally. But also, she sort of put this ticking clock onto Trevor that he didn't have before. Like, he had all the time in the world before to figure out this cure. Now he's got to do it before he dies or gets assassinated, and he's a huge target for assassination. But they add this subplot. Well, not subplot, but they add this wrinkle where, again, his brother, they just foist everything. Like, his brother is a character of convenience created by the screenwriters. So they just foist every distasteful thing they need Aeon or Trevor to do. They just push it onto Johnny Lee Miller. So Johnny Lee Miller comes up and he's like, oh, well, people were starting to naturally give birth again, but I killed them all. So it looks like nature's going to... So they add this caveat that people are starting to naturally become fertile again, so it removes the urgency from the climax. If that makes sense.
Oh, for sure. Well, the emotional urgency and the drama, because the other thing they do is at the end, her and Trevor hold hands and they're like, we love each other, but they could have. And why? I don't know why they didn't. I know why they didn't, because the studio stepped in. But I guarantee it should have ended with her saying, I'm going to blow that up. So it should have ended with them not having the Johnny Lee Miller thing. Mm-hmm. They should have said, no, nobody is naturally giving birth.
Dave.
Trevor has...
If I could interrupt you for 1 second. Yeah, you're Dave.
Yeah.
This, if they had deleted Johnny Lee Miller, this was almost a really great prequel to the Aeon Flux series.
Yes,
because what happens is she crashes the cloning ship into the wall, which opens it up to the outside world. So it could have ended with Trevor being like, "You fucked us all with this. How could you do that?" And she's like, "Well, we had to be free." So she moves out. They start their own city on the outside of Trevor's city, and then Trevor rebuilds the wall. We're right back where we started in the series, and now we kind of know what's up. Like, Trevor's in there trying to figure this shit out, but he's also an evil bastard.
Yeah, and why these two kind of occasionally fuck. That's what I was getting at. Is it should have ended with her and Trevor fighting each other.
Right.
They should have gotten together, but then they should have had an ideological difference where she's like, I'm blowing this up, and him going, it's our only hope, and her being like, fuck your only hope. And it should have ended with them actually fighting. And then she crashes it, and the guards, and this is straight from a episode, guard should have been like, I have a clean shot, and he could be like, no, don't take it. Let her run. Yeah. And the idea of her and the Monacans, like you said, create a different faction in the woods. That would have been perfect.
Yeah.
And that's really Johnny Lee Miller, bless his heart. Nothing against the actor.
Against him, I like him. Obviously,
but his character.
What the fuck is his hacker name?
He's Zero Cool.
Zero.
Right?
Zero Cool.
Yeah. I don't know.
No, that's not right. He was something else, wasn't he?
I don't know. He's some sort of a hacker.
Fuck. Something override.
I don't know, but Crash Override.
Crash Override.
Yeah, but they basically bring him in to nerf the drama between the characters. Yeah. they say it's okay. He's the actual bad guy, and that really hurts the movie through and through. Yeah. It really should have been a case where at the end we have a moment where we're like, oh, I guess Trevor's good, and then we learn, oh no, he's not good after all. But
This is the section where we're supposed to be talking about what the movie did right. So just to reiterate, the climax is almost a good climax.
All right, here's something that I'm going to say they did 100% right. 100% right. I wouldn't change a thing. And that is the casting of this film.
Yeah.
I personally think that Trevor and Aeon Flux, perfect. Perfect choices. Had they made this movie correctly, like if they ever try to remake this again, I would say keep the same fucking actors. Charlize Theron even sounds like the character. She looks similar. Great casting. I said like a little of the pacing and narration, a little of the cinematography feels like Aeon Flux. Like it feels like they definitely paid attention, or someone did. And it got fucked up.
Because there are flashes of like the weird, like all the stuff with Pete Postlethwaite, for example. There are flashes of like, somebody clearly understood the source material and had an affection for it. So there are glimpses of like what a movie of Aeon Flux could be in this movie.
Yeah. And really little parts, like we're talking about the non sequiturs, like they show a guy looking at a woman at the beginning, he starts crying, and then they cut away, and you're just sort of like, wait, what was that? Like that feels like the pacing. Another thing they do that Aeon Flux, the cartoon, did a lot is infiltration. They have a lot of infiltration in this. Aeon breaking into these weird, like brutalist-esque buildings and using weird fucking dildos, like these gadgets to infiltrate, and she flips around and stuff. They do that. It doesn't look great, but they do those beats. And like the way her house looks and stuff is very similar, but as we said, it's a little different, but it's like I'm willing to accept a slight visual difference if they understand the idea.
Yeah.
And so there's just little things like that it's very clear. I mentioned her skin map, her weird eye, her shoe socket. Like it's very clear that they understood some of the ideas. They just couldn't bring them to the full realization. They didn't get weird enough. The cloning, as we mentioned.
Yeah.
The dying getting reborn. These are all good ideas.
And the overarching idea, like the explanation of what Trevor is doing.
Yeah. It's defanged. Like that's what it really is that you could take this exact same plot and kind of do a few script passes and really make it work. And then the same with the visuals, where it's like if you just pushed it a little more and said like, let's make this a little fucking weirder, like even like that alone, I would still say make the plot weirder in my opinion. Even if you just did minor changes and just made it look a little more weird, that might have been enough.
Yeah.
But they just, it's just so nerfed.
Even like I said, doing the Pulp Fiction approach, which at the time this movie came out was already 10 years old. Yeah, 12 years old. So.
Yeah. That would have been fine. There's a lot of things that they could have done, but they didn't, and that's a shame. And nowadays, if you ask me, should they make a new Aeon Flux? What should be done with this property? My answer then as well would have been the same, which is make more of the show, please. It only got one season, and that's why I've seen it so much, because I have to watch it on a fucking loop because there's not enough Aeon Flux. There just isn't. I know they made a video game. I never played that.
Oh, wow. Yeah, no, I'd be down to watch another crack at this movie made by somebody like Guillermo del Toro or something. Like it needs to be, or like Brandon Cronenberg.
Yeah, fuck it.
Like it needs to be. Yeah, well, I mean, and not
that's the thing.
Not to take away from Karen Kusama. It's I'm sure her hands were pretty tied by the studio machine behind this movie. It just they need to. I would be open to seeing another movie with the kid gloves taken off, with the handcuffs taken off, where it's like just let it be weird as hell.
Yeah, exactly, and that's why Cronenberg comes to mind, because the show actually has Cronenberg-esque plots. Like body horror aside, it's just the fucked upness of the plots. Like someone who can do it's like dark Star Trek episodes,
Sure. Dark Trek. I just wanted to make
Yeah.
it clear that I'm not saying I don't think the choice of filmmaker was the problem here. It was the instinct to restrain the property.
Yeah, I haven't looked into what went wrong with this movie.
Neither have I.
But yeah, I guarantee that there was some studio battle, right?
There must have been. Like I said, it feels sanitized twice over. It really does.
Yeah, it really does. And I don't know if it's like again, great casting, but I don't know if like Charlize Theron, because she was pretty famous at this point. I
she
feel
won
like
the Oscar already.
Yeah, so I wonder, like, okay, did her people get involved too? What was there? Just
Who knows?
layers of sanitation?
Who knows?
Yeah, I really don't know. Maybe they should have involved fucking Peter Chung in there a little bit. Perhaps he could write a script for you. But that who the fuck knows?
You're talking crazy talk now.
I guess that's all I
think we've talked enough about this film. Yeah.
Yeah, we didn't really talk about the plot, but this was one where it's like I felt very passionately about the original. After this, I'm probably going to watch it today, maybe tonight, because I'm now like, oh yeah, I want some Aeon Flux.
Yeah, no, I got to dip my toe. Got to dip my toe back in the orig.
Oh yeah,
back in the
getting that
orig.
Flux. Yeah, it's man. If people haven't watched the show, and if you're into weird, fucked up shit, watch the show. It's a lot of fun. I think. It's very horny. Very horny.
It's excruciatingly horny.
Yeah, it's horny in a way where I'm like flinching, like, God damn, this is horny.
It's alarmingly horny. But yeah. It's weird as hell.
It really is.
Extremely unique.
Yes. All right.
Yeah.
Well, shit. That's an episode of BADAPTATIONS.
It sure is, Dave.
My goodness, Grumblebee. Thank you so much for being a producer.
Thank you.
Thank you for making this show happen. Folks, this was through our Patreon, patreon.com/gamefullyunemployed, along with doing, custom podcast tiers. There's also tiers like for $5 a month, you get access to exclusive Patreon, exclusive podcasts. That's what they're called. Tom and Jeff Watch Batman, Fox Mulder is a Maniac, Star Trek The Next Futurama, Spiel Boys, all for $5 a month. If you want to pay a little bit more, we watch movies every Friday night with our patrons. We will not be watching this movie because it is kind of boring.
I think we already did watch this movie.
Jesus. Wow. Why would we?
2 or 3 years ago, yeah. I think we paired it with Ultraviolet.
I'd watch the show.
Yeah?
Oh, pairing it with Ultraviolet. That's a tasty pairing right there.
That's a brutal evening. We also have a store. If you head over to gamefullyunemployed.com, you can find a link to our Teespring store where we have all kinds of cool original artwork and designs you can get on t-shirts, mugs, stickers, posters, all sorts of things. So slap your fly-catching peepers onto that.
Yes. They did the fly catch.
They did.
They did the fly catch.
They did the fly catch. It wasn't as cool, but I appreciate
it wasn't
that they
as
did
cool.
It.
Yeah.
All right. Bye.
Bye.